You go to Marquette to play Division I basketball. Talk about, I guess, the dynamics there, right? And even because this is still in the '60s, right, or the late
Yeah,
'60s, right?
yeah, man. Yeah. Marching for open housing. I marched. I didn't know what I was marching for because nobody really explained it. But like most people, it's a crowd and we're all together and we had relationships, knowing each other. So I marched with them for open housing because we weren't allowed to live outside a certain area in Racine. Nobody would even take you to a
Hmm.
suburban house, even if you could afford the house. You got to remember, this is the time of Angela Davis. Milwaukee had the Commandos. California had the Black Panthers, and at the time, Chicago had the Crips. you know, you know. So there was some organizations that were aggressively protesting, either with guns or with their legs and marching, with the signage or with their commentary about the things that disturbed them about this country. And that's the mentality I grew up in. Then I'm looking around, man. I see Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Jim Brown, Bill Russell, all of these great players from all the major sports who were superstars before they started coining the phrase superstars. And they were talking to Ali, who was dead set on not participating in a war because of his religious beliefs, you know. And that let me know it was all right. It was all right to feel this way. You see, all those little observations and experiences are constantly shaping the way that I wanted to think or that I felt I had to think in order to be somebody and be accepted. These were people, Bill Russell on television doing the pro game, after he plays, his commentary, his diction, the way he spoke, all of that was eye opening to me, with the nice suit on. And he's sitting there with a gentleman who's ingratiating him about his history and his past and the championships and showing total respect to Bill. Those are the fundamentals that were driving me to want to be somebody because I wanted that same level of respect, that same level of being human because I wasn't getting that. I wasn't getting that at home and I wasn't getting that out in the streets. And I looked at myself as an ugly duckling, tall, skinny, droopy eyes, and back then, nappy hair, if you know what I'm talking about.
So, Jim, on the sense of like, you're talking about being able to see people on TV to simulate, the life that you thought they were representing themselves, the right way. When you talk about Kareem, you talk about Bill Russell as a, I would say as a, I don't know, as a recipe or as a way for us to really stay motivated. Would you relate that to our observations, as you mentioned before, and trying to get out to get the experiences? Because we all have different ways our cards are
Yes,
dealt, right? So how do we really
yes.
still have that motivation to kind of go out there, even though some things may not be, you know, laid out the way we want it to be?
Well, I think it always comes back to a couple of things. One thing is you don't have to accept your circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And if those circumstances are not motivating you to be a better man or a better woman, or if those circumstances are not allowing you the opportunity to be what you want to be, you know, then you need to try to come to some conclusion with some alternatives or with something that will help you to get what you want to be. And I do know this: everything big starts small, and you know that as an engineer. Atoms and all those things were created. The amoeba, the one-celled animal where we all are part of and created from. They weren't big. They were small things that became larger, and that seemed to be the progression of life. That once you establish a premise, and then you have the discipline and the toughness, and you take two steps forward and maybe one back, but you stay on the plan. You stay in the system until your systematic approach until you achieve what you want to achieve. And I had learned that earlier because I had overcome some things. I had learned how to forget the way my dad used to beat my mother because it was a way that I could cope with the current reality by not giving it any significance and not dwelling on it. And I fought forward. And I was in constant conflict because my dad was constantly telling me to be something. and he was constantly telling me and giving me the challenge to achieve. But then I saw him beat my mother. You know what I'm saying? And then I saw him during vacation times and during holidays when he got those big checks. He would leave us for 3-4 weeks at a time, man. And we'd have to go begging to the Salvation Army or to my father's relatives and cousins in order to get food so that we could eat. And then he would come back and act like nothing ever happened. You know, these are the things that I'm dealing with. But for most young people today, understanding who you are is so fundamental to your actions and how you think. You need to have that foundation. You need to study history. And if the history that you're studying doesn't satisfy you, study some more, do some research, investigate, be curious, ask questions, read books, listen to documentaries, take notes. All of that is fundamental to you understanding who you are. And what you find out might surprise you, but it'll all be for the good. And that's what our young people are going through right now. Many adults are going through that right now. You know, it is so hard for our young people to be themselves because they're afraid someone will criticize them or it may be offensive. But it is so important for you to be yourself, whatever you are. And then from that, learn more about your families, your ancestry. I don't know if Ancestry.com is an answer, but maybe that's a start. I did learn that my people come from the West Indies. Okay, but in my timeline of study about the passage coming from Africa to this country, the first stop was not Virginia, it was the West Indies. And then from the West Indies, then it progressed as the British got more involved in the slave trade. Then they started going to Virginia on American soil. But it started in the West Indies. Why? Because the sugar cane and tea and other things that they could get, and they bartered and trade. They would trade the slaves, give them to the plantation owners, and then they would take the sugar and stuff like that, tobacco, and they'd take it back to England. That was one of the first stops made. So you sort of start getting an idea of your relevance based upon getting a better understanding through your research, through your curiosity as to what this is about.